This is The Guardian.
Hello and welcome to The Guardian Football Weekly, and after so much euphoria and unexpected winners and tears of joy, we are left pretty numb by what happened in Liverpool. Someone driving through a crowd of football supporters celebrating winning the title yesterday evening. Just a devastating event. All of our thoughts are with the injured and their families. As always, moments like this make it feel totally trite to talk about football matches, but this last week has shown just how much the game means to people, so we will discuss promotion for Sunderland after that thrilling finale against Sheffield United, Charlton and AFC Wimbledon. I think the polite word is win cagey games against Orient and Walsall, respectively. We'll round up the rest of the EFL news before it can shut down for a few weeks, as fans studied retained lists and wonder how their squad can go again with 8 outfield players and no goalkeeper. We'll answer your questions, and that's today's Guardian Football Weekly. On the panel today, Barry Glendenning, welcome.
Hiya, Max.
Sanny Rudravajhala, hello.
Hello.
And from Not the Top 20, George Elek, welcome.
Thank you, Max.
Okay, so we're recording at around 20 past 8 on Tuesday morning. So the latest we have from what happened in Liverpool is that 27 people have been taken to hospital in total. According to the ambulance service, of those, 1 adult and 1 child have been seriously injured. Another 20 were treated at the scene, including 4 children. A paramedic on a bike was struck but not seriously injured. When emergency services arrived at the scene, 4 people were trapped under the vehicle. According to the fire service, that vehicle was rapidly removed so the injured could receive treatment. A 53-year-old man has been arrested. It isn't clear why it took place. Police do say, though, it isn't being treated as terrorism. As is the way of social media, it is almost impossible to avoid seeing truly harrowing videos of the incidents. Most of you probably will have seen them, and it is perhaps having seen them, even though I was desperately trying not to see them. Liverpool said, our thoughts and prayers are with those who've been affected by this serious incident. We'll continue to offer our full support to the emergency services and local authorities who are dealing with the incident. It's one of those situations where, like, the football that we're going to talk about pales into insignificance, but at the same time, there's not a lot to be gained from spending an hour discussing this when the news will probably have changed by the time that you listen to it. I think it is worth calling out the far-right blue tick brigade on social media, who immediately jumped to conclusions and tried to make political capital with no thought for the victims at all. Our thoughts are just with them. And I will move on. Just on the euphoria that we mentioned, I don't know if anyone saw the Crystal Palace celebration. Doc Brown, who's a massive Palace fan, actor, comedian, sort of polymath, I guess, was hosting it. And he brought out those 2 lads from the TIFO. And it was just so beautiful. They came out. This is to end the parade. And I think they're Scousers, actually. So presumably their family moved up north, which sounded quite incongruous when they were just talking about their love for Crystal Palace. But it was a really lovely moment and a lovely touch, and what these celebrations should really be about. Let's talk about the playoff final then, the Championship. Sheffield United won, Sunderland 2. 8 years away from the Premier League, 4 of those spent in League One. The way they won the semi-final and this is just utterly ridiculous. And look, Barry, you talked about being there yesterday. I'm sure you'll repeat yourself in a minute. But George and Sanny, you were there in a more professional capacity. George, that last minute, even if you're there, as a neutral, though, you can get swept away in those moments.
Massively. I was lucky enough to be sitting in the posh seats next to the Sunderland dugout. So I took a video on my phone where the players, the substitutes and the guys who'd come off were, a couple of meters away from me, and you could feel, the nerves as the full-time whistle approached and the magnitude of the occasion for them. And as you say, for Sunderland to win promotion in this way, to come into the playoffs in such bad form, and to have 2 moments, I think as football fans, the reason why we support our clubs is that we hope that we have 10, 20, 30 moments that will define our lives in terms of football. And Sunderland had 2 in 10 days. Yeah, absolutely incredible in terms of the Ballard goal in the semi, and then Tommy Watson, who, he's someone who has not played that many minutes for Sunderland, has looked incredibly exciting when he has done. I think Sunderland fans are all pretty frustrated that they won't see more of him in a Sunderland shirt because he's off to Brighton, which was announced a few weeks ago. But for him to come off the bench and score in the way that he did in front of the Sunderland fans with just absolutely outrageous composure and poise for a player of his age, to given the time that anyone who's watched Tommy Watson knew he was going to shoot there. He shoots a lot. As soon as he got the ball in that kind of space, he was always going to have a go. But it wasn't, we've seen them so many occasions over the weekend, because playoff games are generally games of very few chances. We've seen loads of snatched opportunities when they come about. but Watson had the composure just to roll it, a proper kind of bottom corner postage stamp out of the reach of Michael Cooper. It was an outrageous finish and a moment of real quality to take Sunderland back to the Premier League, where their fans, of course, believe they belong.
Yeah, it was like a putt in many ways, wasn't it? It just looked sort of perfect. Sanny, where were you?
I was in the press box, so I was right near the Sunderland end. In fact, all three playoff finals, the winning fans were on that. I don't know if it's the east side or west side. I know it is the Hoodoo now. I can't remember which end it is. But anyway, so right by that. So that was complete carnage. That was absolute bedlam. They made a big thing about not bringing pyro into the stadium, like for all three playoff finals, big signs everywhere. And yet there was absolutely loads of it everywhere. You know, I think it's technically illegal, isn't it? But it was there. What it did do is it meant that the spectacle was huge. You know, red clouds and white clouds everywhere. I had my reporter's monocular with me, so I could like zoom in and have a look really closely.
Sorry, I know you've sent these to us on the WhatsApp group. Listeners will not know. And also, I mean, I've got a vague idea, but what is a reporter's monocular?
Well, it's basically a bird watching monocular. So like binoculars, but one eye. Yeah.
Right, okay, got it.
I call it a reporter's one because that's my justification for having it.
Isn't that a telescope?
Well, kinda. I guess it's a monocular telescope.
You were like Magellan. You were just
yeah, basically. Originally, to like, peer behind a curtain. Originally, it's because like on 5 Live when I'm doing match updates, you only got 10 seconds to say what's happened. And in that time, I really want to find out who scored. I'm not sure. And the quickest way is to look at the shorts number on a player, celebrating player. And that's why I've got it. So, but also in these situations it comes in very handy, especially when Wembley's so big and you're so far away. But what it meant was I had this really like quite surreal view of what was going on when I looked through it, because I could just pan with my monocular and look across this sea of faces, but then I could actually look at them all closely and see them all going, each and every single individual, like going absolutely mad. Like most of them were shirtless. It was complete chaos, and it was just brilliant. Absolutely loved it.
Yeah, a mate of mine, Tom, who plays in holding midfield alongside me in a very slow 2 for Melbourne University Old Boys, and Mackham, who just yells shape a lot in full Mackham. When Ballard scored, I think he'd already booked his flights, but he was like, right, I'm going. And he went for, I think, 3 days. And I was like, why are you going to watch Sunderland lose 2-0 to Sheffield United? And when when I watched that goal, I was like, oh, thank God he made that journey. 24 hours on, Barry, are you still, have you come back down to earth?
Yeah, I'm still delighted. I think this victory draws a line under the sort of banter era of the Sunderland regimes who were in charge of the club during the Netflix documentary era. You know, that clown who paid £4.5 million for Will Grigg after having a deadline day meltdown, and his Rupert of a sidekick in the red trousers. You had Martin Bain in as chief executive, and he came across as very David Brentish in Sunderland Till I Die. Jack Rodwell sitting on a 70 grand a week contract in the physio room, never actually playing for the club and refusing to leave. And let's face it, who could blame him? But that's kind of over now. And I think of all the Mackhams who sort of took the place of the narrator in those series, who loved the club and how pleased they must be. Mackham Palamine sent me yesterday a picture of Eliezer Meenda on an EasyJet flight to Alicante. He scored Sunderland's opener. I noticed he was sitting at the front. He'd paid for extra leg room. I hope he had speedy boarding because he deserved it. And he's off. Presumably, I checked. He's from Zaragoza, which is about a 4-hour drive from Alicante. So he's obviously off home for a break. Yeah, it's just fantastic. I feel a bit sorry. I know a few Sheffield United fans, work with a couple, and I feel sorry for them because it's the 5th one they've lost. But in a way, I don't feel sorry for them,
Yeah.
Tough.
I do. I tell you, I feel sorry for Kiefer Moore, George, because, you can make mistakes. You can, if you do a dodgy back pass, but they don't score, it's fine. If you let your man go and they don't score, it's fine. But, Sheffield United are building an attack, and he has laid the ball off probably 1 million times in his career. Like, it's not a hard pass. And yet you can just see in that moment, he knows he can't catch Watson. He's like, and then when it goes in, he kind of crumples. And he's so big that it takes him so long to crumple to the ground.
And the thing, it felt like this was a game of loads of fine margins, loads of kind of coin toss moments. And that was the most important one of them, because Anel Ahmedhodzic was off the pitch getting treatment. And that meant that Vinny D'Souza, their normal holding midfield player, had dropped back into centre-back. And that meant that when Tommy Watson when the ball was picked up from the back pass from Kiefer Moore, rather than there being your holding midfielder there to try and stop the attack, there was just a huge amount of space in which for Sunderland to attack. Also Kiefer Moore had a header incredibly well saved within a minute.
Amazing save.
Incredible save. And, Patterson, who's come under a lot of criticism, the Sunderland keeper, there's no doubt in my mind who, Tommy Watson, yes, of course, he scored the goal. My ended with the first goal. But the reason why Sunderland, the most important reason on the pitch why Sunderland got promoted on Saturday was Patterson, because he made that save from more early on. But even more important was just before the equaliser, Brooks was 1-on-1 for Sheffield United, sent Patterson the wrong way, but Patterson still put off an unbelievable save with his feet before Ballard got back and scrambled it clear. And then, of course, there was the VAR decision, which is a frustrating one for people like me who don't want VAR anywhere near any football, but in particular the EFL, because it's one of those where it's relatively subjective, but there's no denying that D'Souza was offside, and you cannot say that he wasn't standing in the line of sight for Patterson. I don't think, had there been no VAR, I can't imagine Sunderland fans watching at home or watching at the game would have been like, that's a disgrace, that's offside. It's only one of those that you only see it in the fourth replay. But in a game of massive importance, VAR made a decision that by the book is correct and turned the game. Because when that goal went in from Burrows, I can't have been the only one in the stadium thinking, oh no, is this going to get ugly for Sunderland? And they went on to win the game. So yeah, sometimes I think it's very hard to win playoffs without some things going your way. And we've put out a pod after this and said in the pod, there's no denying that Sheffield United on the over 90 minutes were the better team, but this is a one-off game. Sunderland took their chances. Their keeper made some important saves. And when it comes to playoffs, that is normally enough to get you up. And I think that with Régis Le Bris and his style of football, which is they're very happy to concede possession for long periods of the game, very happy to attack in transition. For once, we've got a manager coming out of the Championship who's won Championship promotion, who looks pretty well suited to trying to take a club and upset the odds and keep them in the top flight.
Just on the VAR, Barry, I mean, basically you repeat the gag that you did on the radio on Sunday. It made me laugh a great deal.
Well, can I shock you, Max?
Yeah.
I love VAR. And George is dead right. I didn't spot the players in the... I think there was two players in an offside position in front of Patterson. I didn't notice. And then when the ref... It took quite some time. I think Sheffield United more or less finished their wild celebrations over on the far side of the pitch from me. And then the ref sort of went to... He had his fingers to his ear and then he went to the monitor. I'd kind of forgotten there was VAR. So that was a big let-off. And thank God for it, I did notice yesterday on the news, it was revealed that Joe Bellingham was in Germany for talks with Eintracht Frankfurt, which slightly took the gloss off Saturday's events. Could you not leave it a week?
Cash in. He'll buy you a whole new defence.
Yeah. Sanny, do you follow what George said about Régis Le Bris and the football that they play? It's quite interesting that Burnley as well, are defensively very solid. And we are desperate for, just for the interest in the Premier League. We are desperate for the teams that come up to give a better fist of it than this season. And I think was it the three that went up last season as well? I forget. Is it two in a row? I think.
Yeah, I think he could do very well because he's different, isn't he? And that's the thing. We know what we're going to get with Chris Wilder. And Le Bris shown that his reputation before he came to Sunderland was all about developing young players, and he's done that really well. And I think Sunderland, the thing about them, I think they've got, it's like a squad of like impact players. Like any of them would could be a great player to come on in the Premier League as a sub and change a game. Like Joe Bellingham may well be off to Germany, we don't know, but he plays very much like his brother. He doesn't like making the simple things simple. Like he'll throw in like a step over or something here, but when it all comes together, it can be huge. But then he's played so many games, and that's the same for a lot of this squad. But Labrie is the sort of person, clearly as a coach, who can get the most out of them. After the game, I went down to the mix zone, and it's one of the few times as a reporter where the players actually want to talk to you, or the ones who've won anyway. Like, it's very rare that this ever happens. But Tommy Watson was doing like a whole row of interviews and stuff, and what struck me was he's quite a confident kind of steely character, because, like, again, as George mentioned, he's not really played many games at all. I think I was at his first ever start against Preston earlier in the season, and there wasn't really any much information about him. He had this big reputation, but we didn't really know much. And like, somebody asked him about his goal, and he said it was like an out of body experience, and that's cool. But then he said, like, the next thing he said was, it kind of showed you what I am as a player. Like, I will take on the ball and shoot with it. That's what I like to do. And I thought it was interesting to say something like that in amongst all this other stuff going on. I mean, he's had a bit of time to think about it, but it kind of shows that someone like him is thinking of the future, and clearly he's been given a platform, and Brighton have spotted it very quickly, and they're going to make something with it. So, I think Labrie, certainly, I think they'll need to strengthen a lot, but they have got the right man with that like pool of players. And all the way, by the way, on the other end of the spectrum, like Patrick Roberts, who came on, another impact sub, who like moments earlier had like, Sunderland were chasing the game, just pointlessly floating the ball into the box for Michael Cooper to collect. And then all of a sudden, the one time Sunderland get 4 positive passes going forward, he plays a perfect through ball for Mayenda. It's like this team of impact subs, so I feel like they need a bit more. But yeah, on the day, in the moment, they can make the difference. And that's what they did on the weekend.
And, myself included, looking at the benches before the game, it felt to me like it was a game set up for, if it's tight late on, then you look at the firepower that Sheffield United had to bring on, and it would be to their advantage. But it was anything but. Brereton Diaz came on and looked pretty poor before he got injured. Callum O'Hare really struggled to make an impact when he came on. And instead, I was surprised that Isidore didn't start. I was surprised that Roberts didn't start. But I think Labrie nailed it, where I think as football fans, we get so obsessed with starting lineups and you start your strongest team, who's a starter and all this stuff. But actually, especially in a game like a playoff final where you can be pretty confident it's going to be tight late on, in many ways, saving players for the last half an hour, saving finishers to come onto the pitch at a time where you're going to need them to step up and they're going to be fresh is more important. And that's where they nailed it. Like Roberts in particular came on and gave them a completely different dimension going forward. Obviously, Watson came on and scored the goal too. So it was Sunderland and their team of young, fearless players who stepped up when called upon, rather than the more experienced kind of star-studded bench by Championship standards of the Blades.
Just before it gets lost in translation, just to mention that Sheffield United's goal and Gus Harmer's incredible run, level with his penalty spot, running the whole length essentially of the field before threading Tyrese Campbell through, and a lovely little dinked finish, and that was from a Sunderland corner. And for the longest time, it looked like Sheffield United were going to go up. Let's face it, Sunderland hadn't managed to create too much. Didn't really look like it was going to go their way. And yeah, Gus Harmer, I wonder what will happen to him next, because he was their one shining light from the Premier League campaign. Remember, Sheffield United finished bottom of that league, and has done even better back in the Championship again. We've seen what he can do at this level with Coventry previously. I wonder whether he'll be around. I suppose they get more parachute payments and all that, but he again, on the biggest stage, showed what he could do.
Sunderland in this game, they had 3 shots. One of them wasn't really a shot. It was a very scuffed effort from Chris Rigg. And the other 2 were goals. I don't think the Sheffield United keeper actually made a save worthy of the name, which is not to disparage him. A shout out, by the way, I met a bloke. He introduced himself to me. He'd flown over from New Zealand to attend this game. So, yeah.
Isn't it? Do you know what? It's quite interesting, George, and I can never remember which teams have gone up previously, having gone down, etc. But only one of the relegated teams in the Premier League went up this year, right? Burnley, and it does seem that it's very hard for the 3 promoted teams to stay in the Premier League, but it doesn't follow that the 3 teams that are relegated automatically go up. Why would that be?
I think it's more a quirk at the moment rather than anything else. If you look, the last 2 playoff finals have been Leeds, massive favourite against Hampton, get turned over. Sheffield United, massive favourites against Sunderland, to get turned over. So in another world, you're looking at 3 out of 3 and then 2 out of 3. Obviously, Luton were a strange case this season, where it's not often you see a relegated side get relegated again, and they'll be in League One next season with parachute payments, which could be interesting. But I would still definitely say that there is a massive disparity in quality between the top teams in the Premier League, sorry, the worst teams in the Premier League and the top teams in the Championship. And that's reflected, if you look at next season, Ipswich and Southampton certainly will be expected to form at least two of the top few spots. And then with Leicester, it's a waiting game to see what kind of punishment is applied to them. I think their fans are expecting a pretty hefty points deduction, which will impact where they finish. And that's why it's going to be interesting what happens with Sunderland, because this is a Sunderland side who, they've made their way from League One to the Premier League via the playoffs both times. When this time around, relatively unfancy going into the season. For all of his personal wealth, Kirill Louis-Dreyfus isn't one of these owners who pumps in loads of money into a club. They operate very shrewdly and smartly. Christian Speakman, their sporting director, is very, very shrewd. If you look at the squad that they're building and the resale value of that squad, it kind of makes me think that I can understand why Barry and Sunderland fans would be sad to see Joe Bellingham go. But given what they're up against, surely the best means to try and stay up is to cash in on 1, 2, 3 assets, get yourself enough money to go out there and sign players of a different level. Because frankly, as much as this is always a sad fact with playoff finals, you're looking at a group of guys on the pitch who are celebrating what they've just done, but a few of them have probably just signed off their Sunderland careers by achieving promotion.
Barry, how much does Luke O'Nien just absolutely love it? I mean, he dislocated his shoulder like 2 minutes in, trying to stop that header from Kiefer Moore, and then like that happened right in front of us as well. So like you could see the doctor like push, and especially with my little monocular, I could see his shoulder like being reset, and he was there and he was going off, and I don't know, you must have seen this as well, like he had his arm in a sling and the match is going on and he's like geeing up the crowd, like come up with his one functioning arm, and then throughout the game he was like cheering on the sidelines, giving out bananas, like he absolutely just lives for it, doesn't he?
Yeah, he really put his heart and soul into it. Lifted the cup with his one arm. At one stage, after the presentation, some players were over celebrating in our corner of the ground, and he got in a hug with two of his teammates, and they all fell over. And I'm thinking, how injured is that shoulder exactly? Because that's going to really hurt. But yeah, jubilation is clearly a great anaesthetic.
Just moving away from this game for a sec, George. Matt says, feels like the Championship provides some great players who are ready to move to the Premier League. Who are George's top 5? I mean, if that's too many to mention, but 5. Are there any potential Ezes, Grealish, Elise, Watkins, Whartons out there? Or is the league less strong than a few years ago? You don't have to give us 5, but
But actually, luckily, we were talking about this with someone at Wembley yesterday, and I would say this is probably the weakest batch right now, where normally there is like one or two you can look at and you say, yeah, they're an England player in waiting. It's just a matter of time until they get there. I think Chris Riggers is certainly one who's incredibly exciting. And I think his promotion to the Premier League will be of massive benefit to him and Sunderland, because he's still incredibly young, but he's played a lot of minutes, and his development I think will be fairly rapid now. Joe Bellingham's another one where I don't personally think he's ever going to have the kind of goal output of Jude, but he's got all the attributes to be a very dominant box-to-box or holding midfield player. And his time in the second tier is now over, and he'll be, I'm sure, a top tier and elite player going forward. Hayden Hackney's one at Middlesbrough who I really like. He's an incredibly good kind of progressive ball player. He's improved physically over the last couple of seasons too. And yeah, he's probably the only one outside the promoted teams. He's an England under-21 international, and I think it's a matter of time until he gets into the top flight. Whether or not he can replicate the likes of Wharton and Eze, even going back to Maddison, Watkins, Bellingham, these guys, I think it was pretty obvious to anyone watching that where their future lay. And I wouldn't say there's necessarily that superstar outside of Trafford and the Sunderland lads that I mentioned.
Jack Rodoni, can we throw him in the mix?
Yeah, he's just definitely. I mean, I think he's still young. I think he'll be a very effective top flight player. I just don't think he's going to he'll hit the heights of being linked to the best teams in the world. If that's the level that we're looking at here, like I think Wharton's going to play the rest of his career. He'll be an England mainstay, and he'll play. I'm sure he'll get a move to one of the biggest teams in the world. The same with Eze. Like there's a level of being like a good Premier League player and being one of the best players in that top tier, and that he may do, but I wouldn't be as confident with him as others in the past.
And Sanny, how do we think the Championship will be next year with Birmingham and Wrexham alongside Charlton? We expect Birmingham and Wrexham to spend money, don't you? And Leicester, Southampton, Ipswich, as George said, like how competitive? It's always competitive, right? We know that, but how do you think it'll look next year?
Well, with respect to our American friends who might be Wrexham fans and ones closer to home as well, I don't think Wrexham and Birmingham in the Championship will really be at the same sort of level. Like Birmingham's infrastructure, the amount of money they've got coming in, the way they're set up, and what they've got to offer players is a much greater level than Wrexham. It was still kind of like, it's funny because in the one hand, I kind of feel like with Wrexham, they need time. You can throw loads of money in it, but eventually, not all the building blocks are in place. Like the stadium is still like way behind where it should be. There's no footprint for them to do anything on that developmental side and hospitality and all that sort of stuff. Like those dreaming for Wrexham to go into Premier League, for example, I think really need to take a reality check because it's extremely competitive and you can't just go around signing aging ex-Premier League players and assume that you can make a good fist of it. I think they need a bit of work, although they've got a couple of young players. I think that's one of the oldest squads. So Wrexham, I think, I temper my expectations with them. Birmingham, I think, have got massive potential. And they've already got Jay Stansfield in as the main man up front. And we know how, if you look at the top 13 scorers in this season's Championship, I think 5 of them are actually recognised strikers. Like, they're quite a rarity, we know, in football anyway. So Birmingham, I think, will do pretty well. Charlton, and we'll talk about them a bit more, but they're kind of going to need to get bodies in, but in Nathan Jones, they've got someone who can play anti-football if they need to. Kind of alluded to what George's saying. The fact that players are there's no outstanding players means that this league is very kind of much of a muchness. Norwich, who've got some amazing players who can score loads of goals, were completely all over the place. The manager is now gone, as we mentioned on the last pod, or about to be. But teams like that can turn it around very quickly because they've got players who can make a big difference there. So I think we've got a very middling sort of league, samey sort of league, but that actually means it's probably going to be very entertaining.
You mentioned Charlton. Let's do them in part 2. Welcome to part 2 of the Guardian Football Weekly. So Charlton beat Leyton Orient to win the League One playoff final. Producer Joel saying it felt like it lasted 17 hours. Barry, I think we should get... I don't know how you feel about Producer Joel,
Are you going to break the fourth wall, Max?
Are we breaking the fourth wall? He is a Charlton fan.
Yes.
It feels like he's quite an easy booking, I think. I think he feels like we can get him. I don't know.
I have no problem with Producer Joel.
No, me neither. Welcome to the pod, Joel Grove, Charlton fan and podcast producer. Welcome. How are you?
Yes, very well. My voice has just about come back in time for this, so yeah. Very happy to be here.
Well, look, you're not allowed to be on for too long.
No, of course.
But as a Charlton fan, how was it?
It was amazing. I think in the days leading up to it, I sort of served as the voice of reason in the group of us that were going, and I was quite calm and sort of quietly confident that
classic producer. Calm.
We were going to win. Yeah. And then we got to Wembley Way, and this is something you talk about all the time, Max, is seeing the colours on Wembley Way and how glorious and exciting that feels. And as soon as I walked out of Wembley Park Station, I just felt sick. My stomach just dropped, and it was essentially just a tight knot until full time. And so the overriding feeling when we did win was relief, I think, because we've been in League One for 5 years, and they've not been 5. If such a thing as a glittering year in League One can happen, it's not been 5 glittering years in League One. We finished 7th, 13th, 10th, 16th, and then 4th this season. It's just immense relief. The season before we were relegated to League One, quite often, if you're talking about clubs in crisis, you use an example of the number of managers they've been through in a season. They had 2 managers and a caretaker. They're a club in crisis. That season, we had 3 owners in a season. So it's just been completely tumultuous. And I think the fan base has found it quite difficult to trust in new owners and new managers during that time. And there's been points where it's felt really poisonous. I think the worst it's ever felt is when the crowd turned on Nigel Adkins, who's maybe the nicest man in football.
You can't turn on Nigel Adkins.
Exactly. It got so bad that we turned on Nigel Adkins. So, no, just completely immense relief. very excited to be back in the Championship. I think there's just such a leap in the profile of clubs that you play against in the Championship, and they're sort of more viable away days and things like that. So yeah, I am looking forward to it. Obviously nervous, but yeah, it was ultimately a good day out. A terrible game.
Thoughts on Nathan Jones? Because I remember meeting you for a pint before the FSA Awards back in December, and I asked your thoughts on Nathan Jones, and you were like, "Nah, not sure," But since then, obviously, the impact that he's had, and watching him on the sidelines, it feels like, really galvanised Charlton as a fan base.
Yeah.
And I remember when you played Sunderland in the playoff final, 5 years ago? And again, it's so different when you go to the Valley and times are bad and the stadium feels kind of relatively empty and a bit sad compared to when Charlton are on the up, where your fans just seem to be, frankly, incredible.
Yeah, I will say one of the things I do when I quite often, if you speak to people kind of around my age about Charlton, they think of them as a Premier League club, and they when I was texting Max about the final, he immediately referenced Klaus Jensen. So one of the things I do is...
That doesn't sound like me.
Well, one of the things I will do on that is when I go back and sort of revisit the glory years, because they were like my formative years as a Charlton fan, I don't tend to look at the results and the squads, and what I look at is the attendances, and it feels sort of unreal to me that there used to be 27,000 fans week in, week out for games against like Wigan and, Bolton and stuff like that in the mid-2000s. So yeah, it is a completely different feeling when the Valley is full. The second semi-final against Wycombe was incredible, and it did take me quite a long time to buy into the cult of Nathan Jones. He leaves it all out there. I don't really know what to say about him, really.
I was going to say, do you wish he showed his heart on his sleeve just a little bit more?
Yeah, I do. He's a difficult man to read. I
didn't have any sleeves on.
No, he didn't wear any sleeves. No, I kind of what I found. Obviously, things did turn in December. I think that with that game we beat Wycombe on the 29th of December is where it really turned, and we went on this incredible run. And what I found really hard to sort of buy into and believe in is a really strong defence. It's really tricky, and not something I think I've ever had to do or ever had the opportunity to do, is sort of believe that you're not going to concede goals. And so when you're playing very conservative, quite attritional football, it has taken sort of a period of 3 or 4 months to believe actually we might not concede a goal. And I think the playoffs are the perfect example of that. We had 3 games, 3 clean sheets. Wycombe had Richard Kone, one of the best performing players in League One this season. Leyton Orient, huge attacking outlets, particularly Charlie Kelman, who's League One's top scorer, and we never really looked like conceding a goal. So I say that's kind of Nathan Jones's crowning achievement, is that I've started to think we won't concede, which is good.
On the subject of incredible runs, our producer Joel did the Manchester Marathon a few weeks ago, and I just feel now is probably a good time to point out that his marathon PB, which is, what is it, Joel?
3:01.
3:01 is better than producer Dave Masterman from the Ellis James and John Robbins podcast. Is better than his marathon PB. So up yours, producer Dave. Our producer is better than you. Well, faster.
Yeah, I don't want to be the best producer, just the fastest.
Well, that's some podcast navel gazing, if you wanted it. Yes, Barry.
This game, well, Joel is welcome to take that out in the edit, but I'm sure he won't. This game just seemed to be... There was a free kick which went in because the Leyton Orient keeper didn't have enough players in his defensive wall.
That's what I thought.
And then just deflected shot after deflected shot after deflected shot that didn't go in. And yeah, it wasn't very good, but it was a lot better than the League Two playoff final, I would venture.
The games just got progressively worse, which is what should happen, right? The games, every game in League Two should be worse than every game in League One. That's how we should understand this sort of thing. I mean, Barry's right. It was not a classic, George. But how do you think Charlton will go in the Championship?
I mean, I was at this one as well, and again as a neutral, but also kind of as an Oxford fan, because I expect we're probably going to be down towards the bottom end of the Championship, and I definitely wanted Orient to win because they're more likely to get relegated next season than Charlton are. I think with Nathan Jones, Richie Wellens has done an amazing job at Orient. There's no doubt about that, but they're going to lose a lot of key players who are loanees. With Charlton, that's not the case. This is a pretty settled squad. This is a manager, Nathan Jones, who I have absolutely immense belief in. I think once he gets buy-in from a club, and that's the fans and the players and the ownership, then, which is something he never had at Southampton, seemingly with the players or the fans, and at Stoke with the fans. But at Luton, the success that he's achieved at Luton, I just never understand with Nathan Jones why people tend to focus on two poor short spells at other clubs when the success he achieved at Luton, albeit only one promotion because he left during the League One and Championship promotion seasons halfway through. But the trajectory that club was set on towards the Premier League, like he was absolutely the architect of that. On a purely footballing perspective, he never should have had to drop down to League One to get his next job anyway. Charlton saw that potential. He's someone who's got an affinity with the club anyway from his coaching days. And yes, as Joel said, it took time, I think, for people to buy into him and the cult of him. But once you do, the success is obviously there. He's developed loads as a manager too. He used to be really stubborn in terms of playing shape, and it was this diamond that he used at Luton that was initially very successful. Then he tried to implement it at Stoke and it didn't work, but he's changed that now. He used to play pretty expansive football at Luton when he had Jack Stacey and James Justin on each as wing backs, which I guess you would do in League Two if you had those two players. But now it's a case where it seems like he has learned that the best vehicle for success is, as he said in his post-match team talk, clean sheets. It's all about clean sheets, and he's worked out a way to coach a team to do that. And that means, I think, next season going into the Championship, they have the perfect manager to overachieve and to consolidate them at that level. We saw Derby move away from Warne and appoint John Eustace, who's someone who is very much driven at creating a playing environment where goals conceded numbers are low. We saw Oxford change Des Buckingham for Guy Rowett in exactly the same way, and both those appointments worked really well. I think in Charlton's case, they already have that man at the helm, and he's someone who's achieved success at that level before. So, yeah, I mean, given the way they finished the season and given and a lot of young quality coming through in this squad as well. I mean, Jones is bringing through a really talented crop of young players whilst playing the style of football, which is hard to do. So I'd be really surprised if they struggled.
A championship full of pragmatic defensive teams. That's
Yes.
what I can't wait to watch. This sounds it's going to be fantastic. Yes, Joel.
Just talked about twice that Nathan Jones has been tempted away from a club. Is that likely to happen again? Is his stock sort of at a level where he needs to prove himself in the Championship again before being offered a bigger job?
Has he been burnt?
I think you've got a really fortunate situation where you've got a really good manager who's achieved success in the past, who everyone seems to think is a clown, which is ideal because he's not. And I think a lot of owners would look at him and his antics and think, I don't want that. I think a lot of fan bases of clubs at the top end of the Championship or bottom end of the Premier League, if their club was linked to Nathan Jones, they would be protesting. It's incredibly unfair and even when he was at Southampton, he knocked City out of the cup. And if you ask Nathan Jones, he will tell you that his record at Southampton was no worse than a lot of managers who managed there before. But there's something about his persona that obviously rubs people up the wrong way. He's incredibly passionate, and his sound bites, of course, his interviews go viral and make people talk about Nathan Jones for non-footballing reasons. But if you cut out all the noise, the success that he achieves when given time is undeniable. But there is noise. And I think that noise means that he probably isn't that attractive a proposition for other teams, which should mean, unless you obviously achieve success again and he takes Charlton towards the top end of the Championship, I can't see there being a world now where he appeals to any other sides, especially now that you're in the league above Luton.
Are they mutually exclusive? Can't you be quite a successful clown, like Ronald McDonald? But that kind of thing. That it is possible, isn't it?
But just on the day itself, like as a fan of a team that's in the shadow of much bigger teams, as a Barry fan with Man United, Man City, and all the rest of it, it was quite a nice day, given that Leyton Orient and Charlton fans, are used to having, being like the smaller side and people going, oh, who's your Premier League team and all that sort of stuff. And also a bit of a strange one was that, like, nobody was in much of a rush to leave because nobody had to, like, get to the other side of the country. It was pretty chill, like, afterwards as well, to the point where Charlton right winger Thierry Small was just, like, walking down Wembley Way with, like, his family, still, like, with his match-worn shirt on and, like, trousers. I think he was getting the tube. And everyone's just coming up going, Thierry, a little chat with him and stuff. And even, like, getting back to Wembley Park station, there was, like, a dad, one Leyton Orient fan with his two sons. And his two kids are going, like, we hate Charlton, we hate Charlton, we hate Charlton. They must have been, like, 6 and 5. Like, they just, this is the first game, like, one of the first games. And, like, no aggro, none of that. Although it wasn't a festival of football, in a way it kind of was. And I think... yeah, it was nice. everyone wants that Wembley moment, don't we? It wasn't an entertaining game, but it was a nice vibe. And you when you're coming into a game like this, these big games, your senses are slightly heightened. You just want to make sure you don't get caught up any aggro and anything like that. And it was none of that. And that was nice, at least. It was the nice final in that respect. Game was horrible, but it was nice.
Nice to hear players getting public transport, like Bobby Moore getting the train with the fans before just wandering into the dressing room. I mean, a word on Orient, I guess, is the tricky thing for them is, I guess, George, is it's hard for them to get to the playoff final. That's a great achievement what Richie Wellens has done, to go again. You sort of imagine Charlton would always be there or thereabouts, even if their league positions didn't always define that. Just in terms of the size of Orient, what they've done is great. It's going to be hard to replicate that.
Yeah, it is. Joel mentioned there whether or not Charlton should be worried about losing Nathan Jones. I think Richie Wellens is definitely one who, Orient fans will feel like they have to keep. And the success that he's achieved at Orient has been so impressive, and it has been so steady, just kind of consistent improvement season on season. And as you say, he did incredibly well to get Orient to this point in the first place, and to beat Stockport over 2 legs. It wouldn't surprise me. There are a lot of championship vacancies at the moment. Orient might be helped by the fact that their season's ended a couple of weeks after everybody else, because you'd think the process is already kind of down the line for most of those. But I think Wellens will certainly be on a few wish lists when jobs do come up. But for the difficulty for Orient now, when you're a club operating at that level and you're trying to bridge the gap between an Orient who will have a mid-table budget around there, although they've just been taken over, so next season could be different. And those at the top is, the loan market is incredibly important. And I can't really remember too many clubs who've used the loan market as well as they have this season. Jamie Donnelly, who is on loan from Spurs, who just, frankly shouldn't be playing at League One, has been such a good creative player for them in the number 10 role. Josh Keeley, the keeper, also from Spurs, who definitely should have done better with a free kick. You cannot deny that. I'm not entirely sure how it went in, frankly, but he's been a massive player for them over the course of the season. Jack Curry, the left back, on loan from Oxford, who I thought was probably the best player on the pitch on the day. And then Ethan Galbraith, who is the right back, who is their player but is out of contract at the end of the season. And then Charlie Kelman on loan from QPR. So, I mean, basically, as soon as that final whistle blew, their 5 best players are just taken out of the club, and that is some rebuild mission now for Wellens. But what I would say, in from a positive perspective, is that I'm pretty sure a lot of Premier League clubs will be looking at Orient and thinking that's where I want to send my young players, because they've done such good work with the crop they had this time around, and they're obviously very good at identifying good young talent. So it'll be hard to repeat the trick, but it feels like a club that are in a very, very good spot at the moment.
Podcast producer and Charlton fan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Max.
Back in your box, Joel.
We'll be back in a second. We'll do the League Two playoff final. Welcome to part 3 of the Guardian Football Weekly. So AFC Wimbledon beat Walsall 1-0. Heartbreak for Walsall, top of the league for so long, messing it up, finishing in the playoffs, then getting to the final and then losing that one. AFC Wimbledon, meanwhile, they've been 3 years away from the third tier. But as you mentioned, Barry, I mean, I wonder, Sanny, were you using your reporter's monocular to look at other things in the sky because of this game?
Yeah, I actually was, because Wimbledon brought loads and loads of blue and yellow balloons.
Lovely.
And such was the heat generated by the fans that some of these balloons, rather than waft onto the pitch, actually got caught up in the heat and rose. And a couple of them ended up going to the roof of the stadium. And I was caught in a bit of a reverie, like American Beauty looking at a carrier bag. It's like looking at these balloons going, wow, this is amazing. And the ex-science teacher in me was like, oh, this is great. Look, this is physics in action. And I did actually get my monocular. I was looking at that. And then Miles Hippolyte had the audacity to wake me up and actually have a shot on goal and score. And I was back in the zone. But yeah, I really was just kind of caught up in it, because there was very little going on other than Matty Stevens' boot falling apart. Which was, definitely the highlights of the first half until that goal, and the balloons. Very little going on. But yeah, physics in action, kids. Great.
Was it one of you, I can't remember, put in the WhatsApp group, the XG was 0.12 until Miles Hippolyte scored?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
So what did you make of the game, George?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a great game. We were quite lucky that the shot on target to goal ratio over the playoff finals was high. I think in another world, it easily could have been a weekend where we had like a 1-0, a 0-0, and a 0-0. Which would have meant for lots of extra time and not many goals. But I mean, yeah, the one thing I would say is even though it was a first half of very little opportunity until the goal went in, I still think AFC Wimbledon were comfortably the better side in that first half. Like if there was a team who threatened that they might maybe nearly make something happen, it was AFC Wimbledon, whereas Walsall looked completely toothless, which was a surprise because they were so good over the two legs against Chesterfield. I kind of thought maybe they'd put their poor form behind them. In the second half, Walsall had a few opportunities. There was a ball cleared off the line in the first kind of 5 minutes of the second half, but AFC Wimbledon defended their lead really well. It's an interesting angle to this where last season Wimbledon were undone so many times by throwing away leads. And even though there was a period in kind of end of March, early April, where in 3 or 4 games in a row they did it, they actually dropped the fewest points from from winning positions all season. And for Johnny Jackson, I think that is a really impressive to take a real weakness, kind of a mentality weakness really, or a system weakness in terms of not defending leads and change the narrative so well. And the way that they defended their lead, where they didn't drop off and have invite on loads of pressure, they kept Marcus Brown on the last man, whose pace really helped them with that, with the output in behind. And yeah, just delighted for Jacko, who I know very well, and I interviewed him. We played foot golf together about 6 years ago, and he told me about how much he was desperate to be a manager one day. And he has been through, coming in at AFC Wimbledon, having had a difficult time at Charlton, where as a player he was obviously such a legend and assistant manager to Lee Bowyer. And I think this is a case where Dons have been rewarded for keeping the faith in a young manager, and they've allowed him to grow. They've allowed him to make mistakes. They've allowed him to learn from those mistakes. He was getting a lot of criticism even before the playoffs. And, we said in our pod, it kind of felt like the playoff final El Sacico, where whoever lost this playoff final may well lose their job. And whereas the other one, gets promoted up into League One. And, as much as I feel sorry for Matt Sadler, I think personally he's done an incredible job this season at Walsall, albeit has been unable to finish that job. I'm delighted for Jacko that he gets an opportunity to manage in League One again.
Did you like foot golf? I sort of, as someone who loves football and loves playing golf, I find it doesn't really satisfy either.
I enjoyed that it was me and Ali and Johnny against each other, and me and Johnny tied, and Ali was about 20 shots behind us. So I like that part of it. But yeah, generally I would say I'd rather do one or the other probably.
Max and I sat in for Hawksby and Jacobs on TalkSport once, and I think we had the British foot golf team in, and we were interviewing them in the studio, and Max asked them if they had caddies when they went around.
What do you reckon, left foot or right foot? That's a good question. Maybe they have different foot. You could have like a football boot, like a Predators for dog legs, little slippers for putting. But yes, it goes up there with one of the stupidest questions I've ever asked. Also, the man who got the world record for going round the velodrome the most number of laps in an hour. I did ask if he got dizzy, which people seem to think was a stupid question, but I thought it was quite a legitimate one.
Can I just say about Miles Hippolyte?
Yes.
What a name.
Hippolyte, the Amazonian queen with a magic girdle. I looked it up because I thought it was a great name.
His goal bounced twice on the way, and it was like he skimmed a stone across a lake. And I don't think enough was made of that. I don't think I've ever seen a ball bounce twice on its way in from a shot outside the penalty area. Maybe it happens all the time, but it just struck me. Yeah, that's like skimming a stone across a lake.
Always in League Two, Baz.
Okay.
The goal line clearance you mentioned was cleared off the line by Raleigh Harbottle, which does sound like someone from a Dickensian. It's a Dickensian story, that, isn't it? So how do you think League Two is going to look next year, Sanny?
As it has been this season, it will be as unpredictable and ridiculous as it always is. I don't think we'll see a team run away with it and collapse like Walsall did. The much talked about 12-point lead at the top by January. 15 points ahead of Wimbledon at that point. But yeah, I kind of think there's a bit of a muchness there. I mean, I'm disappointed that Carlisle went out of the league. I think they had a massive load of potential, but hey ho, if you invest it badly, you end up getting out. But yeah, I kind of think it can go. Yeah, it could be anyone. It really could be anyone because it doesn't take much. It doesn't take much, especially when you think. Remember, the top 7 can make the playoffs. So you can always kind of sneak in. I don't think there's anyone at this point in time really standing out. But I might defer to George. You might have a better thought than me on this.
I think there'll be a few. I mean, basically, unlike other leagues, I would say that League Two doesn't necessarily track season to season. as much as others, and there'll probably be some teams towards the bottom end, or at least the bottom half of League Two, who end up spending quite a lot of money and therefore elevate their squad quite a lot. Barnet, who got promoted out of the National League, I think will go pretty well, as teams normally do when they get promoted. They've been seriously impressive and play a style of football that I'm excited to see more of next season, and certainly very ambitious in terms of what they can do. Chesterfield, they will go again under Paul Cook. I think only injuries stop them from being one of the better teams in the league this season. I'm sure that if they don't suffer that same misfortune, then they'll be competitive. MK Dons with Paul Warne at the helm, you've got to look at them as being a likely team who will recruit heavily over the summer with a manager who knows how to get promoted, whose style of play should be pretty well suited to League Two. But yeah, I mentioned for Walsall and Matt Sadler, I'm really intrigued to see what happens there now, because I always hate it when managers get judged on their own success. And in Matt Sadler's case, that's obviously what's happened. He built a phenomenal team for the first 6 months of the season, or 5 months of the season, lost Nathan Lowe in ridiculous circumstances, given he ended up not playing for Stoke after the deadline closed in January, and who was the best player in League Two whilst he was there. And therefore massively tailed off, but the underlying numbers, the data side of things, suggested that they were getting quite unlucky rather than being just really poor. At times, they conceded loads of goals from range 25-yarders going in every week against them. I know a lot of Walsall fans want to see the back of Sadler, and I think there's probably a lesson in their opponents on Monday, where when you've got a young manager who's learning their trade, experiences like what Matt Sadler's gone through over the last 5 months or so can be massively beneficial to coming on as a manager. And I think if Walsall did sack him, my hunch is that another team would probably profit from that, because you don't do as well as they did in the first 6 months unless you've got something about you.
And keep your eye on Swindon Town under Ian Holloway. I think they lost only 6 from December onwards. He exercised the ghosts on the training ground and got them all playing brilliantly. So it's interesting to see how he does next season.
And of course, Cambridge under Neil Harris, which I'm amazed and I'm slightly frustrated. You never mentioned my club, and now I'm feeling like an idiot. I'm feeling like that.
There's a really worrying trend at the moment of teams who get relegated out of League One struggling when they go down, and I don't think that'll be the case with Cambridge, because I think in Harris you've got a very, very, at the worst, very canny operator whose style of football means that the floor should be pretty high. But yeah, maybe like Shrewsbury, even though they've got a manager that I still rate very highly, Michael Appleton, you worry about these clubs that maybe don't realise that if you're a really bad League One side, the chances are you're going to be a really bad League Two side as well, unless you improve over the summer.
Dom says, hi Max, Barry and the rest of the Football Weekly crew. I found the podcast during COVID. I've been an avid listener ever since. The steady stream of football chatter mixed in with Barry's distaste of the arts, the strong anti-American bias, thanks for bringing it up, has been a source of joy for me since, and passion for which you all speak about the game we all love is wonderful to hear on a weekly basis. This season, for the first time since dropping into non-league, we scraped into the playoffs with a winner, with an away draw at Gateshead enough to sneak into the playoffs at Gateshead expense. From there, a ridiculous 4-3 win at Rochdale, having been 3-1 down, and a win on penalties at Forest Green have led us to an improbable playoff final against Oldham, who themselves have had ownership problems in the recent past. I should say, as a Southend fan, is Dom. It's the biggest game for either of these teams for some time. Both clubs are estimating that demand for tickets will be in excess of 30,000 fans per fan base and setting a National League record for attendance. Following the completion of the semi-finals, the club were informed by the National League that due to engineering works on the underground and Wembley Park Station being closed for the day, their allocation for the game is limited to 17,500 tickets. While both sets of fans are obviously desperate to win, the chance to celebrate our local teams on the grandest stage should be something to cherish, especially given where our clubs were in the very recent past. And I worry that decisions made by people who do not have the fans in mind is once again going to leave a bitter taste in the mouth. Anything you can to highlight the issue would be greatly appreciated. Keep up the good work and keep the steady stream of Barry on Munich plane stories coming. It wasn't a plane, it was a train, but it's all the same. Up the Blues, says Dom. Sanny, it is deeply frustrating, isn't it, what's happened here?
An absolute mess. And the authorities, carrying out the works on the station, all that stuff, they knew that this was happening, right? Because this allocation has come down to whether they can get fans safely there. Like, this has been booked. I think the National League came out with a statement saying that this has been organised for over a year, that they've known about this. It's almost like the people who are engaging this are unaware of the size of football. They're unaware of how many extra people come, that this is our national stadium. Yes, depending on where you sit in the stadium, you might get soaking wet, which is in itself a bit of a nightmare. But overall, what? I don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, no, I just echo what Sanny says. It's a mess. It's so frustrating. You know, 2010, I went to the National League playoff final, Oxford York. I think the attendance was like mad, like 60,000, and it was incredible. And the idea that as a fan you can't go to that day, and there will be Southend fans or Oldham fans who are sitting at home because the allocation is so small. It's just a total mess, frankly. And is another all too common occasion of fans seemingly being thought of last when it comes to football these days.
On the subject of attendances, Max, the 3 playoff finals drew a combined crowd of 211,858, which absolutely smithereen the previous record from 2008.
Yeah, amazing. I'll finish with this from Scarman Rev, who says, please mention Clydebank FC, who won promotion to the 5th tier of Scottish football. Their supporter-owned Phoenix club, a once-proud Scottish Premier League team, boasting players like Davy Cooper. The club is on its way back to the big time. That echoes with Sanny, doesn't you? And Berry. Amazing sides in Clydebank's league now. Troon, Pollock, Auchinleck, Talbot, Cumnock Juniors, Shotts Bonaccord. Which produces all sounds like a John Grisham novel. Anyway, well done, Clydebank, and good luck to you. And that'll do for today. Quickly, George, to mention, not the top 20, you're playing the Crucible in July. A few tickets still available. Would you like to sell them here?
Yes, please. Thank you. Yeah, 5th of July at the Crucible in Sheffield, part of Crosswires Festival. We are playing Saturday 3:00 kickoff, as it should be. So please come and see it. We'll be talking about the EFL season just gone, a couple of special guests there too, and then we'll be out and about in town afterwards watching the Lionesses. So if you want to come have a fun day talking football and having a few drinks, then please buy tickets on the Crosswires website.
The one thing I would say, George, having been to the Crucible several times to watch snooker, obviously not theatre, just snooker.
Are we theatre?
It is not as big as it looks on the telly.
Okay.
And it doesn't even look particularly big on the telly.
It is George and Ali versus Bill Werbeneck and Tony Knowles. Anyway, thank you, George. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Cheers, Max.
Thanks, Sanny.
Thank you. It's been a wonderful season.
Cheers, Baz.
Thanks.
Right, it hasn't ended, Sanny. International football in about a week. Football Weekly is produced by Joel Grove. Our executive producer is Danielle Stevens.
This is The Guardian.